All right, today we're going to talk about the high order performance framework. This is fantastically helpful in the development of leadership strategy, in leading oneself, in leading one's team, identifying purpose, and importantly, troubleshooting along the way. So it starts with a pretty simple task, and that's identifying a goal of any kind. This is the easiest way to enter the high order performance framework. So some might say that's to win a championship, or it's to hit a certain mark, or a sales quota or something like that. Identify a goal. Maybe it's to get a promotion, whatever it may be. You can apply this to both your professional life and to your social life as well, but we'll get into that at a later date. So you start with a goal. The next task is to envision what are the dispositions. I'm going to try to write legibly. What are some of the dispositions it's going to take to bring that goal to life? Here's an example. If you want to be a Super Bowl champion football coach, fair enough. There's your explicit outcome-based goal. But what are some of the dispositions it would require to get to that level? So do you need to be patient? Do you need to be the steady hand when things become chaotic? Do you need to be creative? Start to articulate what those might be. And what you'll have is the beginning of a profile. You've got an explicit goal, and you have some of the dispositions it's going to take to bring that to life. Let's say one of them might be patience, calm, or what we call steadiness. Maybe another is the ubiquitous growth mindset. These are all important dispositions to the accomplishment of the goal. Now, we can refer to the framework. That's your high order performance aim, but instead of staying there, we're going to backtrack. We're going to move all the way down to the bottom to what we call the bedrock level of the framework. Bedrock. That is the foundation upon which the rest of the performance strategy will be built. And it's really important for us all to recognize that whatever we try to go do, we remember that we are embodied. We have this human vessel taking our good ideas from place to place, helping us relate to other people, bringing our goals to life. Down at the bottom, you'll see we have eat, move, sleep. That is nutrition, exercise or movement to some degree, and rest. Sleep is the most notable form, probably the most important form, but all of these are important. And although the literature would back this pretty clearly, it does not take a room full of journal articles to understand that if you are malnourished, sedentary, and sleep deprived, there's probably no way that you will maximize or optimize your potential in pursuit of whatever goal you've got. So take care of yourself. Address the foundational bedrock components of your performance, and we'll come back to that more later. But do not forget that this is absolutely essential. We'll often use a term, we say leading well depends on the wellness of the leader. And that's absolutely true, especially if you want these to come to life. Now, at the language, communication, and relationships level, we just call that LCR. At the language, communication, and relationships level, we remind ourselves that language matters, the way we communicate our ideas matter, and the way that we relate to other people and even just the world around us is essentially important. It defines how we experience it. I'll give you an example of language. If you were to say, man, it is so cold outside, I'm so frustrated, it's a Chicago winter, it's freezing outside, what a bummer, I don't want to go to work today. Of course, that will influence the way that you step out into the cold. Whereas if you were to say, I acknowledge that it is cold outside, what's my next step? Maybe it's grab a coat, maybe it's add a layer, or whatever it might be. But the language you use plays a massive impact on the way that you interact with your environment, and we'll have a whole lesson on that very idea. You might begin to see that the reason it's presented hierarchically is that if you do not tend to the bedrock concepts, if you're not taking care of yourself to some degree, your access to these more challenging skills might be challenged. It might be limited. Relationships might be the most powerful example of that. If you're going to go have a complicated conversation with, say, a significant other or romantic partner, we'll use that one because it can be powerful, but you are on 3 hours of sleep, I'm sure you can envision that relationship being more challenging, or that communication, working through a difficult problem together, being more challenging in that sleep-deprived state than if you were well-rested, maybe even active, maybe even well-nourished. all of those things. We'll come back to it. Sleep plays a major role in all of this. When we talk about gap capacities, we're talking about bridging the gap. That's the gap level. We're talking about bridging the gap between where you are and where you want to be, or bridging the gap between these fundamental components and your highest order of performance, which happens up here. The you it takes, the version of you it takes to bring your goals to life. So these are where things, the entire field of social emotional learning, character development fits nicely into that category. It might be grit, a gratitude practice, growth mindset, deliberate practice, any number of these things that are pretty well studied, sometimes hard to identify, but absolutely essential to our advancement. Those would fit in the gap category. And then once we get to the performance stage, that's when it all comes to life. Let's use, for the sake of an example, let's use growth mindset. Very popular. If people are unfamiliar with this term, the idea would be that a growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset would be the development of a disposition that allows you to engage with challenges and confidently move through them. Maybe not always confidently, but you at least believe that you have some agency in that movement. It's studied most often in young learners. So Carol Dweck out at Stanford University, she's the pioneer of this research. Her work is brilliant. One of the most famous examples is with younger math students. Okay, so imagine this. There's a class broken into two categories. We'll just call them A and B. For group A in this young and advanced math class, students are taking tests and usually succeeding at a pretty high level. When they succeed, they, in column A, are patted on the back and said, fantastic, you've done it again, you're so smart. You've done it again, you're so good at math. Whereas B, the kids in category B, are patted on the back for their success, but then the framing of how they got there shifts. So congratulations, you've done it again. You must have worked so hard. You must have really taken advantage of the study hours or whatever the situation might be. Now, you let that play out for long enough. Then you move down the road, and what they did was they presented these young, talented people with an unpassable test, information that they did not have full access to, et cetera, et cetera. So they were failing for the first time in their academic lives. So they present them with this challenge, and then they just watch. And you could probably guess the outcome. But the folks in column A, who again were praised for their ability, they hit the hurdle, the challenge, the setback, and they start to doubt. Self-doubt creeps in. The inner narrative would look something like, well, maybe I'm not as smart as my teachers told me. Maybe I'm not as good at math as I thought I was. Whereas the people in column B, instead of self-doubt, self-reflection. So they might say, maybe I didn't study as intently or as much as I should have. Maybe I didn't take advantage of the study hours. Maybe I was on Netflix or my phone all night and could have done more. So that's sort of the outcome of what it looks like. But what it's really addressing is the idea that what had been cultivated over time was either praise for a fixed trait, I am good at math, or praise for an approach, I am good at studying for my math class. And when they hit this hurdle, those who had been, within whom a growth mindset had been nurtured, they were able to engage with the challenge far more effectively. So let's say growth mindset is what we want, a piece of what we want. Well, as we just explained, that'd be the gap level. And as we just explained, language, the way that you name the environment, the self-talk that begins to creep in the presence of the challenge becomes absolutely essential to the cultivation of a mindset that interacts with how you're experiencing the challenge. Well, what happens just below that? Consider this. If you are on almost no sleep, if you are sleep deprived, you do not have full access to the language that's still up there in your brain. You just don't have full access to it. So if your physiological state, your bedrock level, is challenged, you do not have full access to what's happening at the LCR level, which limits the ability of these gap capacities to present themselves fully, and obviously provides a challenge to the accomplishment of your goal, importantly, in this way. It limits your ability to maximize your dispositions. Now, if you can see this, I'm really drawn all over the place here. You'll note this. That doesn't mean that you're not talented if you find yourself in, say, a sleep-deprived state. But if bedrock is challenged to a certain degree, it doesn't mean that you can't accomplish. It just means that if this is the entire framework, okay, if this is the entire framework, I'll draw a second pyramid over here, and this is your highest order of performance, but your bedrock level has been challenged, fine. But you just might have limited your peak potential. So you're still you're still fantastic, you can still get up and go into the world, but know that your habits along the course of this, from a holistic perspective, will impact your highest order of performance. And that's something we should all get in tune with. I think, this happens for all of us, probably more routinely than we'd like. But if the neighbor's dog is barking or you don't get a good night's rest, that doesn't mean, in the context of this framework, you shut it down and don't go to work. No, you should be tough enough to go to work even when sleep deprived or whatever the situation might be. Just know that in these moments, say, of communication, when you're trying to relate to other people, just do a little self-check and say, maybe because I'm sleep deprived and I know how that throws the system out of whack slightly, maybe instead of being reactive and frustrated and thinking all of a sudden Carol from accounting hates me, maybe you self-check, self-reflect, take a breath, and move forward a little more slowly, at least for that day. And then that evening, get to bed on time. Prioritize sleep. Try to put the whole framework together. Now, this may seem like a lot, and we'll go over this slowly, bit by bit, over the course of time. But the big idea is this recognition that, I know a lot of us are on our phones and we see wellness influencers or folks who would say something like, the key to success is fill in the blank. And my caution for all of us is just to note that there is not one path to the waterfall. There is not one strict template to whatever you might determine or think success might look like. It is completely individualized. It is holistic, and it requires a lot of self-forgiveness. So it requires intentionality, deep understanding about how the human organism works, and a lot of forgiveness. Because ultimately, if you take a misstep, growth mindset again, if you make a misstep, the charge is not over, the task is not done, the story is not complete. Forgive yourself and those around you, and just adapt. We'll come back to it over time. And I think the highest performers of all time, high order performance, the highest performers of all time become experts at this. They don't hold on to failures too heavily. They keep coming back to the drawing board, adapting, forgiving, reappraising the situation, and sometimes grandma wisdom, just get a good night's sleep, have a good dinner, maybe get some exercise, and a good night's sleep can go farther than you might imagine.